Okay, good evening, everybody. It's great to see old faces, new faces to this event. We want to do that more often. We want to engage our current students, but also our alumni more often. So please be prepared to see those events popping up your email box anytime soon. We really want to do that because it's important to keep contact, just to know how you're doing, just to making sure that there's still a connection in terms of education. We have a mission to educate, so that's why also we kind of build those events around learning, around content, what's going on right now, what is cutting edge, and the perspective from our faculty as well, from those who you've been learning for a year and a half or something like that. So because they are coming from the field, they know exactly what's going on. So it's very important to maintain that link, and that's what we wanna do with those events. I don't want to take too much time. I just want to say that there is a lot of exciting things that are going on at CPS and GW. First of all, we are moving forward with the name change. I just wanted to put that out there. So we'll have the Security and Safety Leadership Program will now become the Homeland Security Program. We've been asking that for years. Finally, we got it. We were patient, but we got it. So I'm very happy with that. So that's a big change in terms of representing what the content of the program is. And I'm sorry about those who did not add that title, but it was uniquely pure politics at GW. So now that we have got the red tape out of the way, so we're capable of offering that program with the right title, the relevant title, we're very happy. Another thing that is going on, we just launched in September the brand new Bachelor in Cybersecurity. So we had a very good cohort. The cohort is about 30-some students. Very strong start. We have hired Director Scott White that is now overseeing that program. So that was a very good hire. He is Canadian, so we are very happy with that start too. So it's a good success. So it's just to give you some news about what's going on. For tonight, I'm pleased to present or introduce three faculty that are two faculty and one guest that we have time to time. Chuck Brooks is from the industries and very well versed and expert in Homeland, but also cybersecurity. He's coming from the industry. He holds several positions. I will let him probably introduce more in detail his experience. We have also so Chuck will provide a perspective on the cybersecurity, but much more from the private sector perspective, if I understand correctly. And we have also Scott Applegate, one of our faculty for those who were in the cyber program, but also I think Scott, you taught also in the SSL program as well, right? The Information System Protection, I believe. So Scott will be providing a much more military perspective on cyber warfare and the cyber threats, state actors, non-state actors, and so on. So looking forward to that. And we'll be starting with John Perrin, which is with us for years now, for ages with us. John is well known for teaching the class on, I believe it's intelligence. And strategic intelligence, and he is presenting tonight. He will give us a overview of what's going on right now on terrorism and radicalization. And the idea of the presentation tonight is to see what kind of convergence do we have with like a state-sponsored terrorism, but also with non-government actor terrorism, what they are doing online, for example, recruitment, training, how to build a bomb or how to conduct an attack or something like that, how that is tying in cybersecurity issues and so on and so forth, and what the public and the private sector are doing. So John tonight will start with the terrorist perspective mainly and the radicalization aspect of it. John?
Okay, I don't press any buttons on this computer, correct?
Do you have
you load your
No, I don't. I didn't need it. I'm an overachiever. I've got like 30 pages. I can go for 3 hours, but I'll only go for the allotted 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
What I want to do is kind of walk you through, I've just a little background on myself. I have 44 years of service. I was on the police department here in Washington, D.C. back in the 70s, 1973 through 87 for about 14 years, and I was with the FBI for 30 years. My last assignment with the FBI was the Assistant Director over Weapons of Mass Destruction, but most of my time with the FBI was working counterterrorism. So what I want to do is kind of give you, just kind of walk you through from the mid-90s to the present, and I'm going to do it very fast here because, like I said, I've kind of chosen what I'm going to talk about today to call it down to about 20 minutes. But before I talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our history. Our history is mid-90s. What were we working in the mid-90s? Does anybody know here? What was a significant event that occurred in the mid-90s? April 19th, 95. Oklahoma City, right? Oklahoma City bombing of the Murray Building. And as a result of that, domestic terrorism was on the front burner. We worked domestic terrorism. So let me talk a little bit about the Murray Building. So at 9:02, rental trucks packed with diesel fuel and fertilizer, and a young man parks it in front of the building, walks away. The result is over 168 people dead, 19 of them children. They were at the daycare center. 650 people injured, and in the immediate area, 300 buildings either destroyed, damaged, or destroyed. That's what he left. I want to talk to you a little bit about McVeigh. McVeigh was a veteran. He was a veteran of the Persian Gulf. He was decorated. And in the 1991, the military started downsizing because the Soviet bloc was no longer, it was breaking down, it was failing. And then what he did was he always aspired to be an operator. So he put in for special forces training. He didn't qualify. So that's important. He didn't qualify. I mean, I would look at that as an indicator, that may be his road to where he decided to go. And then he got an early dismissal. Thank you for your service. You have an early discharge. And that's how it was worded. So we had two things. He had failed at something, and what he was doing for his last few years, he was asked to take an early discharge. So I think that's important to know. And then a couple other things happened. In 1992, we had the Ruby Ridge incident. That was Randy Weaver. There was an assault on his compound by federal agents, and horribly so, what happened was his wife and son were killed. So that stuck in his mind. And then a year after that, we had Waco, Texas. At Branch Davidian compound, we had 75 people die in the inferno during the standoff. So that was something that weighed heavily on him. He also, his dislike for the communist regime kind of shifted when he got out of the service, and what he did not trust was our government, our federal government. He didn't trust our president. That was President Clinton at the time. He had his campaign to the presidency was on gun control advocate, and he had done very well on that, and that hit McVeigh hard. So and then during that time also, you hear the term lone wolf, and that's what he was described at. Although he had accomplices, he had Nicholas and a close circle of friends. And what I call it sometimes is leaderless resistance, because what had happened was he joined a group, and he felt when he was in that group it wasn't radical enough, so he left that group because he thought they were all talk, and he went out about to do something himself. He considered himself a soldier. Okay, so because of that, the federal government, Congress, we had hearings, we went through this whole, what you see on TV all the time. Every time something happens, everybody's got to have a hearing, do an investigation, and domestic terrorism was on the front burner. So all the resources, all our budget was towards domestic terrorism. Right-wing groups, supremacist groups, militia that advocated violence, those sort of groups. So that's what we were working. We were still working international terrorism, but all the major part of the resources went towards domestic terrorism. That was the flavor of the day. We were working international terrorism, but it was kind of on the back burner. So there were a few things that led up to 2001. If we remember, in 1993, they made a movie on it, Black Hawk Down, Battle at Mogadishu. In 1993, there was a bombing of the World Trade Center. Then there were the embassy attacks in Africa, and then we had the attack on the Cole. The common thread through all that was Al-Qaeda. Either they participated, they planned, or they trained others to attack. And people wonder, well, how come we didn't, worry about that happening here? It was against American interests, against American citizens abroad. I think at that time we felt that that would not happen. They didn't have the wherewithal to muster up attack and attack us in our homeland. And that was a terrible mistake. It was kind of flash forward now to September 11th, 2001. Who would have thought, because usually when there was a hijacking, there were demands, aircraft would land in an airport, they'd go to a designated zone, negotiations would take place. Who would have thought that they would get aircraft, and as soon as they took off, because they were full of fuel and people, they were used as missiles, and what did? They crashed them into buildings. We didn't think that would happen. And what they did was they crashed into buildings that stood for America. They crashed into financial, Twin Towers, financial power, Pentagon, military power. And if not for the heroes on the flight that went down in Pennsylvania, they would have crashed into the seat of government, either the Capitol or maybe the White House. There was again, hearings. We had the 9/11 Commission. We had the WMD Commission. We had IRTPA, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. And there was reform throughout the government. It was described as failure of intelligence collection, failure to share information, failure and lack of imagination by the U.S. government. Those were some of the criticisms, some of the recommendations. IRTPA, what they were was more of a facilitator. They had areas of responsibility. One was reform the intelligence community. Two, reform the FBI, turn us into an intelligence entity. They ensured that an appointed DNI was appointed. National Terrorism Center came into being. DHS was given specific roles and responsibilities. So they ensured that the 9/11 recommendations were adhered to. So that's kind of what the lay of the land was then. I know in my organization we went through a massive reorg. Criminal squads overnight turned into anti-terrorism squads, counterterrorism squads. They took agents that worked criminal work, and now they were used to taking down enterprises. They did it with drug enterprises, gang enterprises, organized crime. So what we had to do on top of that was give them the requisite training to work counterterrorism. So that was successful. It took some time, but it was successful. We had legislation and the lack of sharing, and when it came to information sharing and intelligence sharing, by law, the CIA and the FBI could not share certain information. As much as we wanted to, we could not share it. So what happened was legislation was adopted either through Congress or by executive order to ensure that information could be shared. We had the Patriot Act. We had several legislative laws passed. The FBI went from a reactive law enforcement entity to an intelligence-driven entity. The FBI now is part of the intelligence community. The intelligence community went through a major shift. everything from a culture shift that happened in our organization, which has to be led from the top down, to hiring thousands of analysts and requesting and actually making analysts and intelligence and agents working together. And it's been very successful. I mean, we just had a 9/11 commission review. It was 18 months they were in our shop. They went through all the operational divisions to ensure that operations was integrated with intelligence. And they actually said some good things about the Bureau and the progress it made over the years. Bragging myself a little bit, I was, again, the assistant director of the WMD Directorate for about 4 years, and what they had written, I'm paraphrasing, is the operational components of the FBI integrated intelligence with operations well, particularly the weapons of mass destruction. Deputy Director assigned me to the weapons of mass destruction about 5 years ago now, and he said, I want you to make it operational, John. He says, and I want operation integrated with intelligence, and that's what we did. So I'm very proud of that. Again, with the passage of the Patriot Act, several other statutes, the information sharing wall did indeed come crashing down. For 15 years, there was not another attack like September 11th. We had intelligence agencies sharing information. We had state, local, and federal folks having given information on terrorist matters. They were on the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. We went from 30 Joint Terrorism Task Forces on the morning of 9/11 to well over 100. Every field office has one. We have regional Joint Terrorism Task Forces. We have fusion centers. I remember when fusion centers first came about, we thought, oh, this is going to be a conflict. Are we going to talk with each other? We are. There's over, I think, 78, 80 fusion centers in the country, and they are talking with the JTTFs. Fusion centers are all criminal, all hazard, and they have intelligence analysts feeding them the terrorism's information. Okay, so let me kind of talk about the decade after 9/11. In that decade, Al-Qaeda they were riding the wave. They attracted money, members, prestige like no other jihad group in history. Bin Laden, he united all the terrorist groups from Europe, Africa, South Asia under one banner by being what they call ideologically flexible. But what he did demand was loyalty. What he did was he vetted all his commanders. They were entrusted with a great deal of freedom, but he demanded loyalty, and all his commanders were strictly vetted. They were all very what we call battlefield worthy. They fought in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Bosnia, but what he had them do was swear a blood oath to him. So loyalty was a big deal. Let's flash forward to 2011. Bin Laden's now dead. Found in Pakistan during a raid. Zawahiri takes over. Zawahiri, Bin Laden, they were in the Pakistan mountainous region in hiding. Bin Laden was actually in Pakistan when the raid occurred. So here's Zawahiri still, because what's happening now, because of the work done by the federal government, that no other and no other attack like September 11th occurred, just shows the integration, the working together, and how they did business. But let's not forget our DoD partners. They had the drones, they had air attacks, and the noose was closing in on not only Bin Laden, but on Zawahiri. So he's in the mountains, but the jihadist movement has moved several thousand miles to Syria and Iraq. And you know the old saying, you can't manage from afar. That's kind of what happened. There were leaders in Al-Qaeda that said, so we have this war in Iraq, where's the leadership? If your leader is in Afghanistan and your soldiers are in Iraq. So that's kind of how that, and I'm going over it very, very fast because I don't want Dr. Lemieux to hook me off the stage here. So it became harder and harder for Zawahiri to maintain that contact I was telling you about with his leadership. And the there was this entity in Iraq called the Islamic State of Iraq, ISI. All right, ISI had been pushed to the brink of collapse by the U.S. and Iraqi forces. Baghdadi was a very smart guy, so what he did was he sent a young junior officer across the border in late 2011 into Syria. He took his finest ISI fighters, he took a lot of money with him, and they started taking city after city after city, to include Raqqa, to include Aleppo. And came to the point where he was so formidable and such a powerful commander that Baghdadi feared he was on the verge of obtaining al-Qaeda support through Zawahiri. And that would elevate him as a leader and an independent al-Qaeda branch in Syria. So what did Baghdadi do? He stole the strategy plan, the game book from al-Qaeda. And al-Qaeda has, if you don't know it, a 20-year strategy for global domination, excuse me. And in the year 2013 to 2016, al-Qaeda was supposed to form a let me say it again, sorry. 2013 to 2016, al-Qaeda was supposed to form a caliphate. I can't say the word, damn it. Caliphate in Syria. Thank you. Round of applause, please. Thank you. So what Baghdadi did was in 2014, he took a page right out of the playbook. He announced the emergence of ISI and Nusra Front, and what that young officer that went across the border for him had put together, and that was the caliphate. And they decided to call it a simple name, ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So that was a direct insult to al-Qaeda. ISIS went rocking and rolling, and that's where they are today. So fast forward to just the last couple of years, ISIS has been kind of pushed to the brink of collapse by U.S. and Iraqi forces, but then they had a break, the Syrian civil war. What did they do? They went to the largest prisons, they V-bedded, used explosive-laden vehicles, they mortared the walls. As many as 200 plus of the most dangerous inmates escaped. They joined ISIS. So they've got some pretty bad folks working for them. They also took advantage of the stream of thousands of men who fled into Syria from Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Europe. We had several from the United States either attempt to go there or did go to Syria to fight. So at one point they were up, I think, 30,000 plus fighters. So ISIS now, remember you got Al-Qaeda, kind of out of sight right now. ISIS is making all the news. They've got this fantastic system where they can put up these videos of everything from battles to the beheadings, but make it almost look like a video game, so it can appeal to a certain part of the communities, the youngsters from about 16 till about 26, 27 years old. But ISIS now has territory. It almost had as much as half of Iraq and Syria. They had money. Our Treasury officials say somewhere between $500 and $1 billion. They had access. Of the 30,000 fighters, at least 35 of them came from the West. So they could travel cross borders without any visa restrictions. So that gave them outreach into Western Europe. They had a narrative, and that was what I talked about, that slick propaganda machine, writing on social media, showcasing the caliphate, and again, having it look almost cinematic. And it gave a lot of appeal to the younger folks, and that just recruited more and more people. And then it had a governing experience. Not just the brutality, but they had hospitals, tax collection, administration of justice. They administrated justice in ways that the people of Syria and Iraq were not accustomed to. So I'm talking about they thought their way was better than the old way. So, and Al-Qaeda never came close to that. So let's get right to why I'm here and I don't get yanked off, is their use of the media. All right, they have the technical ability. They say some of their folks used to be anonymous, and they were helping them set up the internet, the communications, the social media machine they have. But I don't want to talk so much about the media or the node. I want to talk more about the message. I'll let the smart guys, Mr. Applegate and who's our other guest, I'll let them talk to the smart stuff. What I want to talk about is the message. They know how to reach the lone wolves. They know how to reach the disenfranchised. They know how to make them feel like they belong. Their message has what we call appeal. Just read an article from a former CIA officer. He was a CIA officer, and he worked sources and networks. But he says ISIS uses social media to promote its ideology, enables them to reach potentially limitless number of lone wolves. But far more important than the method of delivering the message, it's the fact that ISIS message is what he called extremely sticky. It's an idea that sticks to whoever's receiving it. And that's what ISIS does, and they do very well. The stickiness comes from it was popular by Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point. He wrote a book, and he defined stickiness factor as the quality that compels people to pay close attention to a product, concept, or idea. Stickiness is hard to define, and its presence or absence often depends heavily on context. Often the way that the stickiness factor is generated is unconventional, unexpected, and contrary to received wisdom. So what ISIL does is they have something to offer to everyone that needs it. People who not used to being heard, who feel like they're ostracized, ISIS has a message for them. You feel like an outcast, ISIS will accept you. You're feeling prosecuted, ISIS will empower you. You want to be loved, ISIS will love you. You want to be famous, ISIS will guarantee you a spotlight on your own Wikipedia page. You'll be on every media for the next week or so, on every newspaper. Want your life to mean something? Kill for ISIS. Want to live forever? Die for ISIS. That's the stickiness. That's the message. That's the idea that really these kids, again, anywhere from the age of 16 to 26, 27, are very susceptible. That is what will grab them. That grabs their attention. That makes them want to belong. And again, it's a sense of belonging, and it's the video game style violence that I talked about before that just gets them all razzed up. I mean, this sounds, almost simplistic, but ISIS isn't talking to you. ISIS is talking to me. He's talking to the people that no one ever talks to. That's the message. My time up?
Your folks.
Okay, I'll talk fast. Where I wrote here some of the challenges. Person doesn't take too long to radicalize. What happens is he's on these forums, and then somebody's, just like we do in the regular world, you spot, you assess, and you recruit. So he's on these radical sites, or even on Twitter, and you find a person that, okay, this is someone that we can get to. You bring them onto another site. Then this is where we have our challenges. You bring them on a encrypted site, and guess what happens? We don't have them anymore. And they can go from 0 to 60 so quickly that the next time we see them, they're in the operation phase. They're doing something. We're hearing about it. And that's the challenges of what's happening in social media, and the big Apple FBI war. What went down, what was going on, what you had wanted to get done, and then what they wouldn't do for us. So, there's that balance. National security, privacy, civil liberties. I understand that. We have to have that. So I put down, this is the FBI director said this just as recently as, actually it was just last year. He was talking about ISIL's MO is to broadcast on Twitter, get people to follow them, then move them to Twitter direct messaging to evaluate if they're a legitimate recruit. Then they move them to an encrypted mobile messaging app, so they go dark. So anybody that's got one of these, they can reach out and touch. Anybody. And we're not going to follow every mobile or any. We have to have probable cause. We have to have justification before we can open up an investigation and do that. But that's the challenge. Let's see here. All right, let me fast forward to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is not dead and gone. All right, so we've got to keep our eye on that. One of the guys that did the review did the 9/11 review, Bruce Hoffman, is also a professor at Georgetown, and he's a well-known author and expert on terrorism. And here's what he says. I'll direct quote him, and we'll finish it here. Al-Qaeda has quietly rebuilt its resources, rebranded itself, and rehabilitated its image. Al-Qaeda has been maneuvering to effect some kind of force merger or takeover, or even a voluntary amalgamation with ISIS, and the merger of both groups could be very dangerous, especially if Al-Qaeda got their hands on ISIS external operations network in Europe. So the threat's out there. Like telling people, the threat is not static. It's always watching what we're doing. It's always assessing. Freedom of Information Act, sitting in our courtrooms, just using the public media that's out there, and they're changing, they're evolving, like we saw with ISIS, like we're seeing with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's rebranding itself. Al-Qaeda has a 20-year strategy. We cannot take our eye off of them. They're hoping that they get their butts beat, and then when they do get their butts beat, they will come in and say, merge into us. If you have a strong sponsor, come back to your base, Al-Qaeda. And then they've got their external operatives that they can work, and we're in a lot of trouble. That's it. Cheery, but that's it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sorry.